Hello, greetings, good evening, good day, everybody, and welcome to the Ask Abhijit show. We have gone past 150 episodes. We are into episode 151, and it's all thanks to you. So, thank you so much for supporting the show. Yes. Um, and as always, we have a whole bunch of questions. The number of questions is going on increasing week after week. I'm getting a flood of questions every week. So, once again, thank you for that. So, before we get into it, as always, let me greet you all. Let's see who all is there on the live chat and let's take a look at that. I can see Geopolitical Dube. I can see Rivi, Kalita, Arita, Goswami, Aman, Urban Punk 9, RTK, Piyush, Roma, Bliss, Nero, Harshit, Green Arrow, Shibin, Sugatan, Giga, whatever, Soumya Dikshit, Sumita, Harsh Negi, Smaya, Ravi Mistry, Pritam, Manav, Manohar, Abhishek, Sanatanist, Nishad Athalye, Samir Joshi, Ashwini, Jay Dikshit, Swatantra Kumar, Yaduvansh, Harwood Butcher, K8991 Gaming, Unnati and Digo Video, Lenin, Nasepam, Paul S. Saket, Shanu, Shiv Vidrohi, Bhavyadeep, Changu Mangu, Rahul Gandhi, Bansi Bacha, Shamik Roy, Tarun Manmat, Pratham Arnish, The World Teacher, Indian Interest, Saurabh Badoria, Aditya Eklavya Lage Raho Online, Rao Shashwat Singh, Vedic Philosopher, Alpha Debosman, Thunder Beast, Himanshu Aritra, Trupti, Kanika, Kapoor's fan, General Dyer, Flying Raven, and so many other people. Illuminati Creek, Bikash, Manav, Flying Raven, ex KGB agent, Jenil, Sriram, Nikhil Vers, Karan, Drijesh Solanki, Suman, and everybody else. Thank you so much for being on the show. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And now let's get into the questions. What are the questions that we have today? I will try and answer as many of these as possible. As always, I get so many questions every week, and I'm really grateful for that. But I can only pick a few, so please don't get upset if I have not picked your question. Please don't get emotional about it. I try and pick the most interesting questions that I can see, and hopefully it provides value to all of you. Right? Let's go into the questions. And this is not a question, it's from AV. It's a shout out to Hockey World Cup, please. Yes, so there's a hockey World Cup going on right now in Odisha, in Rourkela, and Bhubaneswar, Kolkata, Cuttack. Yeah, well, it's in this region that the Hockey World Cup is being played. And unfortunately, there's not much coverage of it in the Indian media. As always, the Indian media is obsessed with only one sport, cricket, and only one entertainment industry, Bollywood. So do please be aware that there's a Hockey World Cup going on. I personally am a huge fan of hockey. I think hockey is a really, really interesting sport. It's a really fast-paced sport. I can never sit and watch hockey. I'm like, especially when my team is playing India, you know, I get really involved in that. And I think there was a match going on just now between India and the old enemy, England. So I'm not sure what happened in that. I was busy with other things. I could not see it. But yes, be aware that there's a World Cup on, and let's support our team and let's support this sport, hockey, which I believe is India's national sport. So shout out to the Hockey World Cup. Yes, indeed. Okay, let's go to the next question. It's by Sanaullah Khan. Hi, I'm from Pakistan. India, as a big brother, should lend a helping hand to Pakistan. In return, Pakistan can give India a safe route to Central Asia. We should help each other for a good future. Well, it's really good to see that there are sensible people on both sides of the border. We typically see the India-Pakistan relationship from a very specific perspective, from a very specific lens, and obviously we cannot ignore the history that we've had, the forcible partition of India by external actors, by foreign occupiers who cut India into pieces before they left India. It was a terrible partition, very bloody, and then there have been 4 wars that have been fought between India and Pakistan, and so that's the terrible history that we have, and like it or not, everybody sees the relationship through that perspective, and the media obviously does its bit to keep the tensions high and all that, but it's good to see that there are sensible voices on the Pakistani side, on India side as well. So the thing is, yeah, it would be great if we could get along peacefully. Let's take a look at the map to understand. I'm sure everybody knows the India Pakistan map, but let's anyway take a look at it. So what is Sanaullah suggesting? There we are, the India Pakistan thing. So he is suggesting that India should lend a helping hand to Pakistan. In return, Pakistan can give India a safe route to Central Asia. So currently, the route to Central Asia is cut off. Yeah, is cut off because Pakistan currently occupies temporarily what we call Pakistan occupied Kashmir. Right. So that's the situation right now, and that is the situation that's been there since 1948. So for this, for what Sanaullah is suggesting to work out, Pakistan would have to return this territory to India. Pakistan occupied Kashmir. That's what would need to happen, and then we can see how things go, right? And there is no sign of that happening. So what needs to happen is that a stable, safe, democratic and peaceful government needs to come into power in Pakistan. Right now, Pakistan is ruled by the Pakistani army, and there's a puppet government that's in place. Yeah, the whoever is the prime minister of Pakistan at any given point in time is never really in power. The true power always has resided in the hands of the Pakistani army, the Pakistan armed forces. Yes. So that's the situation. So I would be really happy if India and Pakistan could get along peacefully, and then there would be no need to ever indulge in a future war, right? But for that, Pakistan has to become truly democratic. Pakistan has to the people of Pakistan need to take back power from the Pakistani army, which forcibly occupies the country. Yeah. And then this border dispute needs to be resolved. We know that there have been massive protests going on in Gilgit-Baltistan, in Pakistan occupied Kashmir. They want reunification with India. Yeah, we know that's happening. So if that happens, then India will regain its land connectivity with Afghanistan and through Afghanistan to Central Asia. And if Pakistan gives up its desire to wage continuous never ending war with India, then we could get along in peace, and there would be no need for any animosity, any future war, any of those things. Yeah. So I think, unfortunately, the ball lies in Pakistan's court. The ball lies in Pakistan's court. India has never initiated any of the hostilities that Pakistan and India have had in the past, right? We have fought 4 wars in the past, and each of these 4 wars has been initiated, unfortunately, by Pakistan. Yes. So whether it's the 1948 war, whether it is the 1965 war, the 1971 war, or the 1999 the Kargil war, each of these wars has been initiated by Pakistan. India has no desire. India has never had any desire to balkanize Pakistan or to break up Pakistan. It's only now that people in India are speaking about this, because we need to find a solution once and for all to the problem that India has faced since 1947. Right? That's the only reason why people in India are talking about balkanizing Pakistan, and it's something that could happen. So if Pakistan can get its act together, if Pakistan can overthrow the army and establish a genuinely peaceful and democratic government, and if Pakistan gives up its never-ending desire to break up and destroy India, yeah, then I'm sure we can live together in peace. Obviously, that's high hopes. Yeah. So yeah, anyway, it's good to see that people on the Pakistani side also have this desire for peace, which actually tells us that most people, most likely on both sides, desire peace. It's only certain elements that Pakistan is, whether we like it or not, it's an artificially created nation. It has been created by the British, by the Western forces, to further their geopolitical interests. It's an artificial nation that's been created, and artificial nations, unfortunately, don't tend to last very long. In the big picture of history, if you see nations that have been created in this manner, they typically don't last a century or 2 centuries. So that's the problem that Pakistan faces. It's an unstable nation. It's a nation that's cobbled together through outside interference. It's a nation that is always on the brink of disaster. It's always being bailed out by outside forces, either by China or by the US. Yeah. So if the people of Pakistan can somehow get rid of the army, you do need an army to safeguard your national interest. I'm not saying you should not have an army. I'm saying that the army should not run the country. In every country, the nation has an army. In the case of Pakistan, the army has a nation. It's the other way around. So the army is a parasitic organism that's preying on the people and the nation of Pakistan. If Pakistan can establish a genuine democracy and a peaceful democracy, then I don't see why India and Pakistan cannot coexist together. Yeah. And in such a case, if Pakistan becomes a genuinely friendly and peaceful neighbor, India will be happy to lend a helping hand to Pakistan. There have been so many leaders who in India, prime ministers and so on, who have wanted the best of relations with Pakistan. It's a never-ending story in India. So it's not like there is no desire. There's a lack of desire from India's side. The problem is it has always been the Pakistani army and the Pakistani politicians. Yeah. So yeah, if the Pakistani people can get their country in order and establish a genuine peaceful democracy, then I'm sure that India will be happy to coexist peacefully and help Pakistan in any possible way. And obviously, India will need the land access back. Yeah, the land border with Afghanistan. So let us see how that goes. But that's where we are right now. It's not exactly the ideal situation. Yeah, that is where we are right now. Okay, let us take the next question. Daniel Nicholson says, you explained the heartland theory, which makes it easier to understand the role of the US in Ukraine. How much do you think Russian interests are at stake? Should Russia fail to prevail in the Ukraine special military operation? What would be Russia's stance should an Indo-China clash break out, courtesy the direction of the US? Okay, we are talking about Russia, the Ukraine special military operation. So once again, let's take a look at the map, because that gives us the right context. So the special military operation is clearly, as we know, happening north of the Black Sea in the Ukraine region. Yes. So let's understand what. So you're saying what would happen if Russia were to fail in this operation, right? So how do we define failure from the Russian perspective, and what are the various forces that are at play over here? So the major forces are in this special operation in Ukraine are Russia and NATO. NATO essentially means the United States. Okay, so what are Russia's objectives and what are the American objectives? We have to understand that Russia has a certain stated objective, which is the demilitarization and the denazification of Ukraine. It obviously also wants to reunify the Donbas region with Russia because it's a Russian majority region. The Donbas region is the eastern and southern part of Ukraine. Kharkiv, Luhansk, Donetsk, Mariupol, all those regions, right? So that is the non-negotiable part. That the Donbas region, first of all, needs to be reunified with Russia. Yes. And the other thing is that they want to, like they said, denazify and demilitarize Ukraine. What that really means is they want to ensure that Ukraine is no longer under US influence, because that is too close for comfort for Russia. Yeah. To have American influence right at your doorstep from the Russian perspective is a red line that cannot be allowed to be crossed. Yeah. So what the Russians actually want is to eliminate all American interference or influence from Ukraine. They obviously most likely want a regime change in Kiev, and maybe they would allow the western part of Ukraine to remain to the rump state of Ukraine, and they would reunify the Donbas region with Russia. They would install a puppet regime in Kiev, and maybe the 1/3 western part of Ukraine could be allowed to remain Ukraine. That most likely could be the long-term scenario. Understand that this is not something they want in 2022 or 2023. It's always a long-term plan. In geopolitics, whatever is happening now is in pursuance of a long-term objective, which is a 20, 30, 40, 50-year objective. That's always how it is in geopolitics. Okay, nobody does anything which is a knee-jerk reaction. It's always no good leader would do that. Only A bad leader does knee-jerk reactions. Whatever is happening here is part of long-term objectives. There are long-term American objectives and there are long-term Russian objectives. So the Russians want to eliminate all American influence from the Ukraine region. That is number one, right? What do the Americans want? They want Ukraine to come fully under American influence, and in the long run, they would like Russia to be balkanized, and they would like to regain the access to Russia that they had during the Boris Yeltsin era. So after the breakup of the USSR, Boris Yeltsin became the leader of Russia, and he was in all ways in every single way a pro-Western leader. He was, one could say, a Western stooge. That's what the Russians think of him. They also think of Mikhail Gorbachev in much the same way. So the Americans would like to have that sort of access once again within Russia. Eventually, they would like to possibly break up Russia and gain access to the incredible natural resources that Russia possesses. This entire immense territory that Russia straddles is home to about half of the entire planet's natural resources in terms of raw materials, uh, oil, gas, coal, metals, iron ore, and much more. Agriculture, so much more. So the Americans would love to gain access to all that, and they would love to see somebody, a weak leader, come to power in the Kremlin. Yes. So that's the kind of long-term objectives the Americans have. The Russians would like to see, what would the Russian long-term objective be? Ukraine is not the long-term objective. The long-term objective is to recreate the kind of structure the USSR had. Essentially, you could call it. A few months back, I had this live stream in which I had given it the title of Akhand Russia, right? So they would like to recreate a USSR kind of situation, Akhand Russia kind of thing. Yeah, they would like to recreate the Warsaw Pact, or the Warsaw Pact kind of satellite states that the USSR had, and they would like to regain some territories that they have lost eventually in the long run. Yes. So that's the kind of long-term objective Russia has, to recreate something like the USSR. The long-term objective of the US is to regain influence that they had in Russia, to get rid of somebody like Putin and to have a weak leader again in Russia, and hopefully to balkanize Russia and gain access to all the natural resources and everything else in Russia. So these are the two competing objectives. So what would it mean for Russia to fail? It means that they will be unable to dislodge America from Ukraine. That is what it means for Russia to fail in the Ukraine special military operation, right? So right now, it's still in the balance. The Russians control about a quarter of what used to be Ukraine, and now the winter is very much in. Yeah, it's very much in force now. The Rasputitsa season is over, so there could be a Russian winter offensive happening sometime. That's what everybody is expecting now. So let's see how that goes. So if that fails, if the Russians are unable to effect a regime change in Ukraine, that's what it means for them to fail. If that happens, then Mr. Putin's future is in doubt, because he will be seen to have failed in his attempt to regain Russian prestige and Russian influence in the region, and then things would go bad for him. So he cannot afford to fail. If he fails in dislodging Mr. Zelensky and appointing a puppet president in Kiev, then in the long run, things could go bad for Russia itself. Mr. Putin may perhaps fall out of power. Maybe somebody else could come in power. It's all speculation, but that's how things could go. Yeah. So everything is at stake for Russia. For Russia, it's essentially a fight for survival. Yeah. For Russia, it's a fight for survival. For the Americans, it's they are trying. They would like to expand further. So the Americans are not fighting for survival. They are fighting for expansion. They have been relentlessly expanding westwards. NATO has been relentlessly expanding westwards since the 1990s. They had given assurances that they would not do that, but they have been doing it ever since the 1990s. So now Russia is trying to stop the expansion, and if they succeed, then the Americans will have to stop at that point, and they will keep on trying in other ways as well. So that's the situation. For Russia, it's a struggle for survival. If they succeed, then they will perhaps go into expansion mode slowly. Yeah. Of course, it will all depend on who comes after Mr. Putin. If Mr. Putin succeeds in this operation, then he will obviously have to think about who is going to be his successor in the long run, because he's obviously, I think, going to cross 70 years of age, more or less. So I don't see him lasting another 10 years. That would be too much. I mean, obviously, in the US, you have a 130-year-old president right now. That's okay, but typically, people do not stay on as leaders at past a certain age. So for Russia, it's a struggle for survival. For the Americans, it's a challenge to their expansionism. That's the situation. Yeah. And what would Russia's stance be to an Indo-China clash, which were supposedly to break out? Well, the Russians would want to be neutral. Yeah, they will officially adopt a neutral position. They will urge both sides to stop fighting and go to the negotiating table and find a peaceful solution. That's what would be the official status. Unofficially, they would want India to come out on top because China is a big threat to them. Yeah, but yeah, the situation is complicated. So that's what I can say about this matter. Now let's talk about the Sino-Soviet split. It's a question by Rodrajit Sarkar. Rodrajit says, you have told us about the 1969 Sino-Soviet border clash after the Sino-Soviet split. But why did the Sino-Soviet split happen in the first place? Both countries were important to each other for many reasons. Did the Americans have any role in this? Okay, so let's talk about the Sino-Soviet clash. The USSR and China both were communist countries, right? We know that in the USSR you had the great strongman Joseph Stalin. In China you had the great strongman Mao Zedong. Yeah, so that's the situation that you had in the 1940s and 1950s. Now Mao Zedong regarded Stalin as a great hero of his. Yeah, he had genuine respect for Joseph Stalin. Yeah. The USSR always treated China treated China as a junior partner. China was a very poor nation. It was a nation that was in shambles, broken up. The USSR had built up these enormous industries. They had come out on top in World War II. They had a very strong, powerful army. They had developed nuclear weapons. So they obviously were one of the two big superpowers, and they always treated China as a junior partner. And Mao Zedong was fine with that as long as Joseph Stalin was in power in the USSR, because he had genuine admiration and respect for Joseph Stalin. Now, Joseph Stalin died in 1953. Yes, Mao Zedong lived on for a much longer time. So Joseph Stalin dies in 1953, and in his place comes a new leader, Nikita Khrushchev, who was in power for about 9 years. 1953 to 1964 or something. So that's Nikita Khrushchev. Now, Mao Zedong did not respect Nikita Khrushchev in any way, the way that he respected Joseph Stalin. He did not have any of that kind of respect for Nikita Khrushchev. He found Nikita Khrushchev to be ideologically vacillating, ideologically weak, and not worthy of the kind of respect that Joseph Stalin deserved. Yeah. So Nikita Khrushchev was in power until from 1953 to 1964. From 1964 to about 1981-82, you had Leonid Brezhnev, who was in Mao Zedong's eyes an even weaker leader. And all of these things, they eventually led to the Sino-Soviet split. So while Stalin was in power, Mao Zedong was okay with the Soviets treating China as a junior partner. But when these leaders who came in after Stalin, who Mao did not respect that much and who he considered to be kind of weak and ideologically questionable, and then the USSR still continues treating China as a junior partner, that kind of rankled with Mao Zedong. And then there were these ideological clashes. So on the one hand, you had the USSR's Marxism-Leninism. On the other hand, you had China's Maoism. So the Maoists, Mao believed that see, in Marxism, in communism, in Marxism especially, you have the idea of the people's revolution, right? This society is a revolutionary society. The dictatorship of the proletariat and all that. So Mao believed that a revolutionary society should be led by the peasantry, the peasants, the farmers, the proletariat. He believed that the Soviet Union's model of socialism, of communism, was too centralized, it was too bureaucratic, and was kind of bourgeois. It was not revolutionary enough. Yeah. And this uh, perception became accentuated after the demise of Joseph Stalin and the coming to power of Nikita Khrushchev and later Leonid Brezhnev. Yes. Mao also did not like the Soviet Union's policy of what he considered to be peaceful coexistence with the uh, capitalist nations like the US. The Soviets wanted to somehow coexist with the capitalist nations like the US, and the Soviets wanted to show eventually that we will come out on top and our system, our ideology is the best. But Mao did not like it. He did not like that the Soviets wanted to coexist peacefully with the capitalist countries. He wanted to see a more vigorous and robust struggle against the capitalist countries and the capitalist ideology. And he also was displeased with the Soviet Union's lack of support for various revolutionary movements around the world. The Soviets did support various revolutionary movements and so on, but that was for geopolitical purposes, not from ideological reasons. Yeah. So Mao was, from that perspective, a little more ideological and a little more idealistic, you could say. And the other thing is that the USSR was focusing on Eastern Europe. It wanted to increase its influence in Eastern Europe, in what we just spoke about, the Warsaw Pact countries, the Eastern Europe satellite states of the USSR. Yeah. And the USSR was focusing on countering the US in that region. Whereas China was focusing on consolidating its control over China and spreading communism again and revolution in the third world. So it was again more ideological from the Chinese perspective. So you had these very stark differences, mainly ideological differences. So from the Maoist perspective, from the Chinese perspective, the Soviets were going soft, and they were not communist enough, and they were not hardline enough. Yeah. And obviously we had the personal animosity between Mao Zedong and Nikita Khrushchev. So that also was a factor. So all of this eventually led to what we call the Sino-Soviet split, which slowly happened after the death of Stalin. From the 1950s to the 1960s onwards, you had which all culminated in the disaster of the Ussuri River clashes of 1969. Let's go to the map. Where's the map? Here's the map. Where's the map? Here we are. The Ussuri River clashes, which the Ussuri River is now the border of Russia and China. So somewhere over here we had this island. What was it called? The Zhenbao Island. Where's the Zhenbao Island? Okay, I try to find it and then I miss it. I'm sure it's here somewhere. Is it here? Let's just Google it for convenience. Zhenbao Island. Is here. It's here. The island is here. So it's over here that the this became a flashpoint. The two nations clashed over here. There were rather brutal military clashes. Several hundred soldiers died total. Both sides claimed that the other side lost more soldiers and all that. In the aftermath of the Ussuri River clashes, the USSR actually decided to nuke China. Yeah. The Soviets decided to nuke China, and it was the Americans that intervened. The Americans intervened, and they threatened Russia with a retaliatory strike. They threatened the USSR with a retaliatory strike if the Soviets went ahead with a nuclear strike on China. Essentially, it's the Americans that saved China, and this action eventually paved the way for the Sino-American détente, which happened under the leadership of who was it? Nixon, Kissinger, and Mao Zedong, and that's what happened, right? So that is the whole deal. So the Sino-Soviet split was mainly ideological, and also we had differences of perception of the border and various other factors, and animosity between the leaders of the two nations. All of these things combined together to create the Sino-Soviet split. That's how it happened. All right. Right. Rodrajit once again. We know that Russia gradually moved to the east and annexed a huge chunk of land. But what happened to the native people of those conquered lands? Good question. I have not heard anyone ask this thus far. What happened to the native people of those conquered lands? Did they suffer the same fate as the Native Americans? This is a very good question and rather important. It's a rather important question. What happened to those conquered people in those conquered lands? Did they suffer the same fate as the Native Americans? Let's once again go back to the map. Oh, give me a second. We need to take a look at the map to understand how things are, how things went. So let's go back to the 13th century. Yeah, let's go back to the 13th century. In the 13th century, first half of the 13th century, you had the great Mongol conqueror, the great warrior for peace, Shri Chinggis Khan, who had conquered an enormous territory in an incredibly short amount of time. He conquered more territory in 20 years than the Roman Empire was able to conquer in 2.5 centuries. Yeah. So that's what Chinggis Khan did. And during Chinggis Khan's lifetime, two of his generals, who were they? Jebe and Subotai, or somebody else, I forget the name. Two of his generals, they went on an expedition, a reconnaissance expedition in the west. All right. After the conquest of Khwarazm, it's a whole very interesting story. It ends up on the borders of India, which I have covered in a different video on the channel. So in the aftermath of the Mongol conquest of Khwarazm, two of his generals went on a reconnaissance mission, and they encountered Russians for the first time. After the death of Shri Chinggis Khan, his son Ogode Khan became the Khan, and later the Mongol Empire expanded much further, and the Slavic peoples and the Russians fell under what they call the Mongol yoke. The Mongols conquered Russia. So this happened in the 13th century, and until the late 15th century, the Russians were under the Mongol yoke. They were conquered people, and they were ruled by the Mongols. It's by the 1480s or so that the Russians were able to throw off the Mongol occupation. That's when you had the great Principality of Muscovy that became a genuine power. And then from the 16th century onwards, the Russians started expanding eastwards. Now, what was the reason for this expansion eastwards? It was all for the fur trade. Fur was a very valuable commodity, and these enormous lands, this enormous expanse of lands in northern Eurasia had plentiful resources of furs. Various animals that have these winter coats. They would be hunted, and the skins would be taken and used for fur, and this was a very lucrative trade, and the Russians wanted to capitalize on that. So they started expanding eastwards gradually, and they came upon all these various peoples, Turkic peoples and other peoples, whom they slowly gradually conquered. So this was a process that started in the 16th century, and it culminated in the eventual conquest of the entirety of what is now Eastern Russia in the 19th century, and they even took over parts of Alaska in the 19th century. No, the entirety of Alaska in the 19th century. By the mid 19th century, they had taken over all of Alaska. It was eventually sold to the US because the Russians believed that there was not much of value over there. It was too far away. So all of this territory was conquered over a period of about 300 or so years. And they conquered all the peoples who lived here. You have all these different, ethnicities who live here. Turkic peoples, the Ainu people in the far east, in the Sakhalin region, in north of Hokkaido, in the Kuril Islands, the Kamchatka Peninsula, all that. You have the Ainu people, the Kamchatkan people, the Chukotku people, the Tungusic people in the Tunguska region, various Turkic ethnicities, the Altai people, the Tatars with whom the Russians had significant amount of strife. Now the Tatars are one of the major ethnic groups in Russia. You have the Yakutian peoples, the Mongolic peoples who live north of Mongolia, the Samoyeds, the Aleutian people, and so many more. So many more peoples were conquered, and they were. So what happened to them is the question. Did they suffer the same fate as the Native Americans? The question then, obviously, which begs itself, is what happened to the Native Americans? What happened to the Native Americans was systematic genocide. At least 56 million Native Americans were wiped out in just about a century or so. I have showed you the references in the past, in a past video. I'm not going to dig it out once again. You can look it up. It's well known. Yeah. And over a period of about three or so centuries, at least 100 million Native Americans would have lost their lives because of the European occupation of their territories. So when it comes to the Native Americans, it was deliberate, systematic genocide. These people were wiped out of existence. That's what happened to the Native Americans, and that's how North America is now all settled by European origin people. And the natives are not even second-rate, but the third-rate citizens in these lands, in their own ancestral lands. What happened to the native people of Siberia and North Eurasia was not quite what happened to the Native Americans. Yes, they were defeated. Yes, they were conquered. There would have been massacres. There would have been atrocities, but it wasn't. It did not culminate in what you could consider to be genocide. What happened was, you could call, cultural assimilation or cultural imposition, cultural imperialism, um, to some extent. Yeah. So all these peoples were forcibly Russified. They were made to start. They were made to speak Russian. Many of them possibly were converted to Christianity, Catholicism, or Orthodox Russian Christianity, and there was some reverse inculturation as well. Uh, Buddhism entered the Russian the Russian cultural sphere. A significant percentage of Russia's population today is Buddhist. Principally, it's principally Tibetan Buddhism that you have in Russia, and that initially came in through the Mongols, because the Mongols practiced Tibetan Buddhism. We have spoken about this in the past on this channel. Uh, so all of these peoples today who live in Russia, whether it is north of Mongolia, whether it is the Altai people, the Tuvan people, the Yakut people, the Aleutian people, the Mongolic peoples, the Samoyeds, the Tungusic peoples, whoever it is, they all more or less speak Russian as one of their principal languages. If not the principal language, then the second language. But they are all perfectly fluent in Russian as if it's their native language. Yeah. Uh, so all of these people were Russified. It was a process of Russification. It was not exactly genocide. It was nothing close to what happened to the Native American peoples. But yes, these people, their territories became Russian territories, and they lost whatever control they had. So they were made to become Russian citizens, and they had to obey the Russian laws and all that stuff. Yeah, and eventually all of this became part of Russia. So it was all conquest, but it was not genocide. It was Russification of all these regions. So that is essentially what happened. They did not suffer the same fate as the Native Americans, but the territories were taken, and they lost sovereignty over these territories. That's essentially what happened. Shaheen Wahman Zadegan says, what was the 4.2 kilo year event? And was this a crucial factor in the end of the Saraswati Sindhu era in India? All right, that's a great question. So, in the past, you may remember I have spoken about an ancient geopolitical event between India and the Akkadian Empire that was in the 43rd century BC. Sorry, that was in the 23rd century BC. It was in the year 2200 something BC or so. There was this king called Rimush of Akkad. He was the second king of the Akkadian Empire. He was the son of the great Sargon of Akkad. He ruled for less than a decade, but he went to war with the people of Ilam and with the people of Marhashi, and the people of Ilam and Marhashi, they had allies in India. And India at the time was what we call the so-called Indus Valley civilization, Saraswati Sindhu civilization, and it is recorded in the Akkadian chronicles that the Indians sent soldiers to the aid of Marhashi and Ilam, and apparently the Akkadians won that conflict. So India participated in a war outside of what was traditionally called India, in what is now Persia or Iran. Yeah, and it was with the Akkadian Empire, which was based in what is now Iraq. So this event happened in the 2200s BC, between around 2275, 2278 or something BC. That's when it happened. About a century after that, we have the 4.2 kilo year event. a century or so after this war. Yeah, after Rimush of Akkad. So this 4.2 kilo year event happened in the 22nd century BC. In the 23rd century BC, we had this war with Rimush. So this 4.2 kilo year event was about a century. It lasted about a century or so. It was a century of drought, approximately 100 years of very less rainfall and significant drought worldwide, globally, in India, in China, in the Middle East, in Africa, drought everywhere. Yeah. So around this time, we know that the great Saraswati River, which was a rain-fed river which originated in the Himalayas and went all the way into the Sea of Saurashtra, which is now called spuriously the Arabian Sea. This river was already declining. The Indian monsoon started declining monotonically around 6000 BC. Slow decline of the Indian monsoon. Because of this, the Saraswati River started declining too, slowly and gradually. And because of this 4.2 kilo year event, this decline was significantly precipitated. And it's probably around this time that the river stopped reaching the sea and it ended in this big lake, which eventually dried out, and it is now called the Thar Desert. The Thar Desert. Let's go once again back to the map. So if you go to India, to Western India, we have the great Thar Desert. You see the entire region of Rajasthan. Yeah, it's all brownish, yellowish over here. Yeah, that is the enormous Thar Desert. Most likely, the Saraswati River dried out and stopped reaching the sea, and it ended up in a big lake or puddle or marsh in this region, which eventually dried out and gave rise to all the sand dunes, the kind of thing that you see in the Aral Sea today, the same sort of thing. Yeah, when a big lake or sea dries out, what you get is a desert with sand dunes and all that. So most likely, as a result of the 4.2 kilo year event, the river stopped reaching the sea. And yes, this most likely was a crucial factor in the end of the Saraswati Sindhu era in Western India. So Western India, the Sapta Sindhu region, which is the region of the Sindhu River, the great Indus River, the Saraswati, which no longer exists mostly, and the various other rivers in this region. This was a very fertile region, and that's where you had the main focus of the civilization of that time, our civilization of that time, which historians call the Indus Valley or Harappan civilization. So around this time, because of the drying out of the Saraswati and very less monsoon and all that, there were significant migrations out of the region. And these migrations most likely started around this time, around the 4.2 kilo year event. And people were forced to migrate to other parts of the region. Many of them went eastwards, many of them went northwards. Northwards, you still had lots of water, many rivers. India obviously is a river valley civilization. So you had the Ganga River Valley, Narmada River Valley, the Yamuna River Valley, and so many more. So people were forced to give up the lifestyle they had been living for several thousand years, and they were forced to migrate to other parts of India. But the migrations were not only eastwards into what we now call mainland India. Many of these migrations were also westwards. Yeah, and it's around this time that you have the that you have the infamous rampage of the so-called Yamnaya men across Europe, right? And it's around this time also that you have various other things happening which indicate Indian presence far west of India. So yes, the 4.2 kilo year event was a major period of drought. Approximately, it lasted approximately a century of drought, and yes, it was definitely a crucial factor in a complete reconfiguration of society and life in the Indian subcontinent and in various other parts of the world. And it could be what precipitated the gradual decline of what we call the Saraswati Sindhu civilization, that phase of Indian civilization, or the Harappan phase or the Indus Valley phase. Yeah. So slowly these cities they were slowly abandoned, and people moved elsewhere, and eventually the cities fell out of use, and they are the way we see them now. So that was the 4.2 kilo year event. It was a major drought, and it kind of reconfigured life all across the planet. Yeah. AB says, you told us about Zebu cattle migration, Zebu, Zebu. Is it possible that the Yamnaya people invasion or migration is connected to the Zebu cattle migration? A good question. Yeah. So once again, let's go here. So I spoke about the Zebu cattle migration. What are the Zebu cattle? Let's first of all take a look at what a Zebu cattle looks like. Let us go back to, where are we? Let's do Google search for Zebu cattle, shall we? Zebu cattle. What does Zebu cattle look like? The Zebu cattle are your standard Indian cattle, the bulls with the big humps on their shoulders. This is what you see in the Ashoka inscriptions and pillars and all that. These are the seals that you see in the Saraswati Sindhu region. Yeah, the Saraswati Sindhu Indus Valley seals with the humped bulls, with this big dewlap, under the chin, this big fold of skin and all. This is the Zebu cattle. These are the Zebu cattle. These are the standard Indian cattle, Indian origin cattle. And it is known genetically and scientifically that these cattle originate in India. These are Indian cattle. They have come from nowhere else, right? So, what do we find? What do we know about the Zebu cattle? I have spoken about the Zebu cattle migration. What we find, let's now go to the map. Let's now go to the map and let me tell you what happened. So, once again, where is the map? Here is the map. Let's take a look at it. Here. So, about 4,200 years ago, which kind of coincides with this 4.2 kilo year event, around this time, it is known that all of a sudden, Zebu bulls started breeding with Bos Taurus female cattle right across the Fertile Crescent, which is this region, Iraq, the Eastern Mediterranean region, Anatolia, Egypt. All of this is called the Fertile Crescent. Around 4.2 thousand years ago, Indian Zebu bulls started breeding with female Bos Taurus cattle in this region, the Fertile Crescent region. Now, cattle, they don't migrate on their own. It's not like a bunch of cattle say, hey, let's go for a walk, and they go all the way to Egypt. It doesn't happen like that. Cattle only migrate with humans. Cattle are domesticated species. They have been domesticated for thousands of years in India. So if cattle suddenly started breeding with local, if Indian bulls suddenly appear in the Fertile Crescent and start breeding with the local female cattle over there, it means Indian people migrated to this region and brought these bulls with them. Yeah. And we have archaeological evidence in Egypt from approximately 2000 BC of Zebu cattle, including depictions of Zebu cattle on pottery and rocks and other such inscriptions and all that. Yeah. So that's what happened approximately 4.2 thousand years ago. And like I said, after the 4.2 kilo year event, people were in the Indian subcontinent were forced to migrate in different directions. Many of them went eastwards and many of them actually went westwards, and that coincides with the arrival of these cattle, these bulls, Indian bulls, in the Fertile Crescent region. Yeah, migrations can happen very fast. You see, the what is now Pakistan and Iran, the border is very much dry. It's very easy to cross, so you can cross this region on foot in a matter of months, in a matter of weeks, actually. Yeah. Even if you have a large herd of cattle with you, it's not difficult to cross this region. Obviously, you will eventually run into the Zagros Mountains and all that, but it's not very difficult to cross this region. So very rapidly after the 4.2 kilo year event, you have Indians arriving in this region. You have the arrival of Zebu cattle in Egypt itself. Yeah. And this is just a few centuries before the arrival, before the empire of the Hittites, the empire of the Mitanni, and the invasion of the Hyksos people into Egypt. This all seems to be a set of coincidences that all happen at the same time. This cannot be coincidences. This is all interconnected. History is not a set of coincidences. History is a set of cause and effect events. It's all causality. It's all interconnected. Yeah. So what happens is that people seem to have migrated from the Saraswati Sindhu Valley region into Central Asia, into the Middle East, into Africa, etc., approximately 4,200 years ago, which coincides with the 4.2 kilo year event. And these people most likely introduced Zebu cattle ancestry into these regions. Today, you have Zebu cattle you have cattle all across Africa that have Zebu cattle ancestry. All across Africa, even in Central Africa, even in Eastern Africa today. Yeah. And these Zebu cattle are unambiguously, unmistakably of Indian origin. And you have Zebu cattle ancestry even in Europe and all that. So that's a whole different story. So that is the deal. Now the question is about the Yamnaya invasion also. So the Yamnaya invasion is said to have happened around 4,500 years ago, which kind of predates by a few centuries the 4.2 kilo year event and the introgression of Indian cattle into the Middle East and Africa. So most likely the Yamnia invasion of Europe was a different event, possibly not connected to the 4.2 kilo year event. Most likely the Yamnaya were people who went out of India a few centuries before the invasion of Europe. They most likely settled down in the Central Asian steppe region for a few centuries, and then eventually for some reason they decided to rampage across Europe and do the things that they did. Yeah. So most likely and we know that the Yamnaya were horse riding invaders. They were fierce warriors. They swept aside everything that came in front of them. Nobody could withstand the Yamnaya invasion. Yeah. And they were definitely not cattle farmers. These were warriors. These were horse riders. They were not nomads who would move slowly from one place to another. They rampaged across Europe at an unimaginable speed. So most likely the Yamnaya people are not connected with the Zebu cattle. They definitely seem to be of Indian origin. Yeah. And the R1b haplogroup is what you find predominantly among the Yamnaya men. The Yamnaya were mostly men, very few women, and all that. Yeah. So that's the deal. So the Zebu cattle migration seems to be a completely unconnected event from the Yamnaya invasion. The Yamnaya invasion predates the arrival of Zebu cattle in the Fertile Crescent by about 3 or 4 centuries. Yeah. So most likely these are events that are not connected to each other. Saurabh Bhadoria says, what was the basis for the hypothesis of chronology of different metal ages, like the Bronze Age, Iron Age, etc.? As they Indologists put the timeline of Rig Veda much earlier because of the mentioning of iron in the text, even neglecting other factors like archaeoastronomy, Saraswati River, evolution of language and from Rig Veda to Sanskrit, and all kinds of things. Okay, the question is about the chronology of metal ages. So we have what is called the so-called three-age system: the Stone Age, the Bronze Age, and the Iron Age. Right. So where does this originate? So there was a guy. It all starts with a guy. What was the guy's name? He was a Danish archaeologist. Let's Google the guy. Yeah. Let's go to Google. Where is Google? Here we are. Let us Google Christian Jurgensen Thomsen. This is the name of the guy. He was a Danish antiquarian, archaeologist, whatever. Yeah. And in the early 19th century, he developed what is called the three-age system. The three-age system proposed that the chronology of human history, it went through three different ages. First, you had the Stone Age, then you had the Bronze Age, and then you had the Iron Age. So, and each age was more sophisticated than the previous age. So, in the Stone Age, the humans could only use stone tools. Yeah, they were very primitive, backward people, our ancestors. They did not have any knowledge of metals and all that. Yeah. So that was the Stone Age, which went on for a very long time. Then you had the Bronze Age. So humans acquired the ability to create bronze tools and weapons. So you have bronze swords, bronze vessels and things like that. And eventually there was an Iron Age, which was more sophisticated, which required better technology, more sophisticated technology, advanced technology than during the Bronze Age. So that is the hypothesis that this person made in the early 19th century. And ever since then, we have been following this. And there obviously has been criticism of this, that, it's a very oversimplification. It's a very oversimplistic model of the progress of human history and human evolution and all that. It's not always like this. And like Saurabh says, in the Rig Veda, there is mention of iron. So then, so in the Rig Veda, there is mention of Ayas, right? Ayas is, well, is it iron or is it some other metal? We're not quite sure, but most likely it means iron. So if people were using iron. Our ancestors were using iron during the Rig Vedic age. Well, that pushes back the Iron Age to a whole uh, to a time period way before what is conventionally understood to be the Iron Age. And then we have to ask ourselves the question as to when was the Rig Veda written. Now, if you ask Romila Thapar, she will say it was written after 1500 BC. It was written maybe 3000 years ago. That's what the Indian Marxist historians will tell you, which is all nonsense from a variety of logical reasons. Yeah, the Rig Veda obviously mentions that Saraswati is a great river. We know what happened to the Saraswati around 4200 years ago. She started drying out very badly. Yeah, so clearly, this is written, and the Saraswati started declining around 6000 BC with the beginning of the decline of the Indian monsoon. So the Rig Veda is clearly written at a time closer to 6000 BC than to 1500 BC. Yeah. The second thing is that the Rig Veda clearly describes the society of that time. It describes a rural pastoral society. It describes a pre-Saraswati Sindhu civilization society. The Saraswati Sindhu phase of our history, of our civilization, was a magnificently urbanized phase of history. Our civilization was entirely urban, extremely technologically advanced, and a very large population for that time. Yeah, in a huge population area, a huge geographical area. The society that is described in the texts or in the text of the Rig Veda is not an urban society. It's not a very technologically advanced society. Yeah, in the case of monumental architecture and roads and grid system and multi-storied buildings and hydro engineering and all that, the Rig Veda doesn't describe any of that. The Rig Veda describes a rural pastoral society. Yeah, so this is clearly something that today's historians would describe as pre-Harappan. Yeah, the pre-Harappan phase is way before 4000. It's way before 4000 BC. So once again, the Rig Veda seems to have been written closer to 6000 BC than to 3000 or 4000 BC. So clearly, the Rig Veda is way older than what these people have been claiming it is. And then the Rig Veda, we know it has references to Ayas, which is iron, most likely. So if the Indian Iron Age was about 6000 BC, that kind of messes up the chronology that our friend, what's his name, Christian Jurgensen Thompson came up with. Yeah. So this entire hypothesis of the chronology of this 3 age system, the Stone Age, the Bronze Age, the Iron Age, it is not a hard and fast rule. It's something that somebody came up with, just like somebody came up with the Aryan invasion theory. It's not, when someone comes up with a theory, it has to stand the test of time and it has to match the observational evidence. And clearly, the Aryan invasion theory doesn't match that. And maybe in the case of the 3 age system, maybe that also doesn't match what we know about our history. So that is the thing. So the basis is just a hypothesis. The basis for the 3 age system, the chronology of the Metal Ages, is just a hypothesis that, or a theory that a Danish archaeologist came up with. It's not something we have to worship as something that's set in stone, just like the Indian Constitution. Yeah, it's a hypothesis that somebody came up with, and it's not something that is set in stone or iron or bronze. All right. Daniel Nicholson says, if the temporary state Pakistan engages India on our Western theater as the People's Republic of China's lieutenant, which would engage India in the north and northeast, we would only have to use the nuclear option to decide Pakistan's fate within the first 5 minutes. In this case, wouldn't the US directly get a premise to send its invasive fleet to Indian shores? What would be the end result of this chaotic war? Garbik Singh Chauhan says, with the USA constantly supporting Pakistan and Russia not compromising in its relations with China, will India be able to independently sustain a two-front war? Let me answer Garvik's question first. It is likely that if India goes to war with China, it will also simultaneously be engaged in a war with Pakistan. If India and China go to war, the Pakistanis will most likely also attack. We have to be prepared for that. And so, the solution in case of a two-front war is to extinguish one front as soon as possible. Now, Pakistan is no match for India in terms of military might. So the solution if India is embroiled in a two-front war, is to extinguish one war immediately as soon as possible. And that's why I had said in the past that in case Pakistan initiates a war with India in the future, that war should be the last war India fights with Pakistan, and the outcome of that war should be decided in the first 5 minutes. That's what I had said. Now Daniel seems to have interpreted that as meaning a nuclear strike. My friends, I will never ever advocate a nuclear strike. The nuclear option is something nobody should ever use. All right. So when I said that the outcome of the war should be decided in the first 5 minutes, I did not mean a nuclear strike. I meant a conventional missile strike, a massive missile strike, a preemptive strike to end all strikes. That's what I meant. I do not mean a nuclear strike. We should never ever use the nuclear option. Now, the question is, if India wipes out Pakistan in the first 5 minutes, will it not give the US a premise to send an invasion fleet to India? If Pakistan initiates the war, India has the right to retaliate and respond. India, as a sovereign nation, has the right to go to war if provoked. In which case, nobody has the right, or nobody will have any pretext to send an invasion fleet to India. Yeah. And what's the point of sending an invasion fleet? By the time the Pakistanis will be dealt with. Yeah. And we'll be dealing with China. So the thing is, India should not initiate the next war with Pakistan. But if Pakistan initiates the next war, it should be the final war, and the outcome should be decided in the first 5 minutes, not through a nuclear strike, but through conventional means. And it should take out the ability of Pakistan to launch a nuclear strike on India. Yeah. So, I mean, I am just giving, a big picture thing. Obviously, the Indian armed forces and the government know better how to go about doing things. But what's clear is that the outcome has to be decided very rapidly, very, very rapidly. It should not be a war that is drawn out and it gets into tank warfare and long, drawn out tactics and all. It should be decided instantly within the first 5 minutes by taking out Pakistan's ability to inflict any kind of damage on India immediately. Take out all their airfields, take out all their aircraft, take out all the radars, and take out their nuclear facilities or whatever else, whatever sensitive and critical installations and all that they have. Those need to be taken out immediately, which is why I always keep saying India needs massive stockpiles of missiles. 50 missiles, 100 missiles, 200 missiles will not do the trick. India needs a stockpile of at least 10,000 missiles of different kinds. That's what a major world power does. Yeah. So that is the deal. In case of a two-front war, the one front needs to be extinguished immediately. You can't let two fronts simmer on for a long time. So the Pakistani problem has to be dealt with instantly, once and for all. That problem should be finished the next time the Pakistanis initiate a war with India. We should not initiate the war. We have never initiated a war with Pakistan or with China. Yes, we have always responded. In the future also, if the Pakistanis start a war, if they do, we should end it very quickly and then deal with the Chinese. This is all hypotheticals, obviously, because India is not the kind of nation that even the Chinese can afford to really tangle with, because they also could end up suffering the kind of damage that would not be nice for them. So just a reminder to our good Chinese friends. So I think that's the question, and that I think I have answered it. Yeah. So the chaotic war, there'll be no chaotic war. It'll be on-off war. That's it, with Pakistan. With the Chinese, we'll deal with it separately. Okay, Samrat says, is India researching about making nukes with thorium? Ooh, thorium. What impact will it have if India obtains the technology of making nukes with thorium? Daniel says, how practical is the usage of thorium as a means of clean energy? India accounts for a quarter of the global thorium reserves. Is it a practical solution to India's power energy needs in the future? How far are we from harnessing thorium-based electricity or thorium-based nukes? Let's see what thorium looks like. Let's Google it. It's a metal. Thorium is a metal. Thorium-232. Thorium. It's a metallic element. Yeah, that's what it looks like. Thorium 232. That's what it is. So thorium is not a fissile material like uranium is. Yeah, it can't be used to create nuclear weapons directly. Thorium can be converted into uranium 233, U-233, which is a fissile element and can be used in nuclear weapons. Yeah. So uranium 233 is produced by irradiating thorium 232 with neutrons inside a machine called a reactor, a nuclear reactor. It's not your regular nuclear reactor. It needs a special kind of nuclear reactor called a breeder reactor. So this process of creating uranium 233 out of thorium 232 is not simple. It requires a special kind of reactor called a breeder reactor. A breeder reactor is a special kind of nuclear reactor which is capable of producing more fissile material than what it consumes. Yep. So you can have a thorium based nuclear reactor which is different from uranium based nuclear reactors. So it uses thorium as the fuel source, and it breathes new fuel from thorium. So that's what it does. So currently what we have is that there are no commercial thorium based nuclear reactors in the world. We have various experimental reactors that are being worked on in the world. Many countries have various development programs. India has one of the most advanced thorium research programs in the world. Yeah, India obviously has a quarter of the entire world's thorium resources. Yep. So India is doing that. We have the largest thorium reserves in the world, and we are actively researching thorium based nuclear technology. And India has been doing this for several decades. I'm not exactly sure where we are at. Yeah. I think the government of India has stated that by 2050, about a third of our electricity should come from thorium based reactors. So that's about 30 years in the future. By that time, if we can perfect, you know, or if we can not perfect, but improve the reactor design and all that, then we could start building thorium based reactors. So that's what we could do. So there is a great amount of potential in thorium based nuclear energy. Uh, and the reactors can be smaller as well and more efficient, and they will produce less of the harmful radioactive waste that your typical normal standard reactors produce. And the chances of a nuclear meltdown also are low because the temperatures in a thorium based reactor are also lower. So it's a win-win kind of situation. I'm not sure why all the nations in the world, like the US, India, China, France, etc., have not gone fully into thorium based nuclear power, but it's certainly something that needs to happen. Now the other question is, what about making nukes with thorium? So yes, you can use a thorium reactor, thorium based nuclear reactor, to breeder reactor, to produce uranium 233. And technically you can definitely produce fissile material that can be used in nuclear weapons in a thorium reactor. But the best way to acquire uranium 235, which goes into nuclear weapons, is to use the naturally occurring uranium ore, which is mostly uranium 238, and to enrich that in centrifuges. So this is a much more efficient process. It consumes less resources, less money, and it produces much more nuclear fuel, weapons grade nuclear fuel, than a thorium based reactor would produce. So so making nukes from a thorium reactor is not the ideal way of doing it. Ideally, you just do it by acquiring uranium ore, which is mostly 238, uranium 238, and then purifying it, yeah, enriching it to weapons grade uranium, which is 90% or more uranium 235. That's how we do it. That's a much more cost efficient and overall efficient process using centrifuges and all that. So India does that, obviously. Yeah, that's how it is. But I think India should really focus on the thorium nuclear power option. I believe that India has one of the most advanced thorium research programs in the world. And the stated objective of the government is to generate at least 30% of India's electricity from thorium based reactors by 2050. So let's go for it. We are fortunate to have so much, uh, such an abundance of thorium in India when it comes to the monazite sands on the eastern coast of India. And Odisha, I think Andhra Pradesh, wherever it is. Yeah. So we have abundant thorium reserves. So we should use this and diversify our energy supplies. I mean, this is obviously clean energy. It's green energy. It doesn't have a carbon footprint or anything. So it's something that India really needs to focus on, and that could really help India in the long run. So that is the deal. How far are we from harnessing thorium-based electricity or thorium-based nukes? Or not? So thorium-based nukes are mostly out of the question. It doesn't make sense to have thorium-based nukes. Thorium is not a fissile material. You have to create. So uranium-235 is the way to go when it comes to nuclear weapons. Electricity, I'm not sure how far we are. We have one of the most advanced programs, but I don't know where exactly we are. Hopefully by 2050, we'll be producing at least a third of our electricity from thorium-based reactors, and that would be great. Okay, Daniel says, I think 2 or 3 people asked most of the questions, most of the interesting questions. Okay, Daniel says, when a thermonuclear device or any nuclear device is detonated, is it possible to exactly determine the impact diameter? Is that diameter dependent on external factors as well? Of course, you can determine the radius, like you said, the impact diameter. So when you detonate a nuclear weapon, you know what is the blast radius and what is the radius in which everybody will die, everything will be flattened, and the radius at which a certain amount of radiation goes out and all that. It can be calculated. It's very simple. Yeah. It's mainly dependent on the yield of the nuclear weapon. The yield is typically measured in terms of kilotons of TNT or megatons of TNT. Yeah. I think the largest weapon that India has tested was a 60 kiloton thermonuclear weapon. Yeah. And the Americans have a standard 100 kiloton weapon called the W something, and they have tested megaton weapons as well. The Russians have tested the largest weapon ever, which was a 50 megaton weapon, which was called the Tsar Bomba and all that. Yeah. So it's pretty straightforward for a nuclear physicist to calculate the blast radius and all that. And there are websites that can help you do that. So let's take a look at one of the websites. It's called nuclearsecrecy.com/something. Let's take a look at that. Nuke map. Just give me a second. nuclearsecrecy.com/nuke map. Let's put that on the screen. 1 second. Give me a second. And here we are. nuclearsecrecy.com. And this comes with all these preset options. You can select any city, or you can select nuclear historical locations, and it's pre-selected New York City for some reason. So I hope nobody gets offended. I'm not. So what do we see? Okay, just for the sake of taking a look at this, yeah, let's do it on New York City. What yield do we want? Let's take a standard bomb, which is the largest Indian weapon, 60 kilotons. Let's take the W76, which is common in the US and UK SLBM arsenal. So we have a 100 kiloton nuclear device, the W76. We are focusing on New York City, which is what the website gave me. Okay, it's not my choice. And we're gonna do a airburst instead of surface, or we could do a surface thing. Let's do an airburst, which is like the bomb will detonate in the air itself, not on the surface, not upon impact. And let's detonate. Boom. So there you go. So the fireball radius is 380 meters. That's the radius. The radiation radius is 1.11 kilometers. The moderate blast damage radius is 3.26 kilometers and all that. So it tells you what kind of blast radius it's going to have and all that. It's standard calculations. You could use a North Korean weapon, yeah, and then see what happens. It's a slightly larger one, slightly larger blast impact. Let's go for a 1 megaton bomb and see what happens. It's a much bigger radius. Do they have Tsar Bomba? 50 megaton. Let's see. Boom, enormous. Yeah. So that's how it is. It's possible to more or less exactly determine the impact diameter. You can also take a look at the radioactive fallout, which will depend on the wind and all that. So here you have, you can see the yellow portion, which is the radioactive fallout, which is dependent on the wind direction. So if the wind is in the direction of the northeast, then it will go all the way to Massachusetts and all that from there. And yeah, let's not take a look at casualties, which will depend on various factors and all that. So that's how it is. Yep. So this website is called nuclearsecrecy.com/nuke map. You can go and take a look at it and play around with the various settings. And yeah, that's how it is. Yeah. So it's definitely possible to determine all these parameters quite precisely, depending on the yield of the nuclear weapon and the height at which you detonate it and various other factors. Yeah. Hardik says, Namaste. Yes, you have said multiple times that India needs to rewrite its entire history. And now the Home Minister, Shri Amit Shah, made a few comments recently. Okay. So the question is, hypothetically, if you were in charge of this project, of this plan, how would you approach this problem? And how do you fix the puzzle since the ASI is useless and so many anti-Indians resist this move? Look, the ASI has nothing to do with writing textbooks. The ASI is in charge of preserving and restoring our archaeological sites. It's nothing to do with the history textbooks. So let's keep the ASI aside in this matter. Now, many anti-Indians will resist the move. There will always be people who resist anything you do. Especially when you're trying to do something good, there's going to be a whole lot of people who will try to resist it. Now, if you have a strong government, you ignore those voices and you do what's necessary for the nation. All right, that's how it is. So the question then is, hypothetically, if I were in charge of this project to rewrite the history textbooks, how would I go about this? Yeah. So what I would do, how many states does India have? 29, 28, 30? No hate, please. I don't remember how many states India has. Let's Google it. Yes, let's Google how many states India has. Let us do it. Let us go to Google. Number of Indian states. India has 28 states, like I said, and 8 union territories. So let's say we divide India into 30 regions. Hypothetically, just for the sake of argument, let's say we divide India into 30 regions. Then what I would do is in each of these regions, I would select 5 or 10 young historians. Obviously, you will have to interview them and see what kind of knowledge they have and what the attitude is. The attitude is most important because, typically a history graduate will be all about dates and chronology, and they will not focus on chronology and the cause and effect sequence and all that. So you need to have historians with the right mindset, the right attitude, and the desire and the understanding that history has been written in a very distorted manner. And hopefully there should be young people. After a certain age, people become very close-minded. After the age of, 30, 35, or whatever, 40. After a certain age, most people stop being receptive to new ideas and stop thinking differently. So you would want young people in their mid-20s or so. Yeah. And what I would do is for each state, select 5 or 10 people and give them the task of researching the last, let's say, 3,000, 4,000 years of the history of that state, from all sources available, and compile a big giant book together collaboratively for each state. So we have 28 states. Let's say we divide India into 30 states, hypothetically. Yeah. So for each of the states, I would constitute a committee of historians who would compile the detailed chronological history of that state. And obviously there'll be interactions. I mean, no state exists separately. No region exists separately. There's always, if everything is interconnected, so there's going to be effects from other states and all that also coming in. So I would do this. And I would give them, let's say, 2 years to do this. So you have 10 people from 30 regions. So that's 300 people. And you give these people, let's say, 2 years to do this work. I think in 2 years, it's definitely feasible to do this. So you would have to employ 300 people, and you would obviously have to have a committee that supervises what's happening and stays on top of everything and tracks the project and all that. Yeah. So you have 300 people working on this, and they do this on a 2-year period, and you would obviously have to pay them. So let's say you're paying them 1 lakh per month. Why not? They're doing good work. So for each state, that's 10 lakhs per month. the 30 states, that's 300 lakhs, 3 crores, 3 crores per month. You do that for 12 months, that's 36 crores. For 2 years, it's 72 crores. So overall, the total budget is 72 crores. And there'll be obviously some traveling and some research and all that. So about 100 crore rupees for 2 years. I don't think it's a lot of money for the central government or whatever. And in 2 years, you get 30 textbooks. 30 textbooks that cover the detailed history of each of these 30 regions. And then you sit to get everybody together, and based on all this detailed stuff, you create a big history of India overall out of all of this. Yeah, that could take another 1 or 2 years. So within 3-4 years, you have not only a set of 30 authoritative histories of the various parts of India, you also have one big overall history book. And that's how I would do it. Yeah. So I don't think it's a difficult task. I don't think it's a difficult task at all. I don't think it will take decades. You can do it in 3 or 4 years, maximum 5 years. Yeah. And it will not cost a whole lot of money. So it's definitely feasible. And it's about political will. If the political leadership is willing to do it, it can be made to happen. It's not difficult. So that's how I would go about doing this. Shri Balram Putin says, while researching, how do you know which information is authentic? History, especially. So let's understand something. When you first start studying a subject, you're a student, not a researcher, right? And when you first start studying a subject, you know nothing about it. You are clueless. So you take one textbook, you start studying it, you're completely clueless. You study it, and you absorb all the information as much as you can. Then you take another textbook, you study it. Over a period of, let's say, 5 years, you study lots of textbooks. And over time, you start understanding the patterns, you start accumulating the knowledge. And if you are intelligent enough, you will start understanding what makes sense and where the information is kind of dodgy. Yeah. So eventually, at some point in time, you make an imperceptible transition from being a student to being a researcher. So most people, unfortunately in India, consider themselves to be researchers from day one. That's one of the biggest problems I see. I'm a researcher. I'm doing research. No, spend 5 years or 10 years as a student. Show some humility, have some patience, study a lot, put in the hours, put in at least several hundred hours of reading, not several hundred days, but several hundred hours of active reading. That's when you have enough knowledge to make the transition to being a researcher. And only when you have that much knowledge can you be able to tell what information is authentic or not. So the ability to understand which information is authentic and which is not is something you have to earn by putting in the work, hundreds of hours of study. Not research, study. Yeah. So from day one, you are not a researcher. Unless you have put in several hundred hours of study, you are not a researcher. And if you do put in several hundred hours of study, then you will automatically be in a position to start telling which information is authentic and which is not. So there is no shortcut to this. I cannot tell you in 3 minutes how to figure out which information is authentic, which is not. It is something you have to earn. And very few people are willing to pay that price. That's how it goes, my dear friends. Tejas says, were catapults invented in India? Ajatashatru, son of Bimbisar of the Haryanka dynasty, is recorded to have used catapults in his war against the Lichavis around 480 BC. Wikipedia, surprisingly, I'm surprised you find it surprising. Wikipedia does not show this and credits the invention of the catapults and the mangonels to the Greeks. Okay, I've not taken a look at the Wikipedia article, but I'm not surprised that Wikipedia credits everything to the Greeks. Yeah. So Ajatashatru was, I think, the second king of the Haryanka dynasty, the son of King Bimbisar. Yeah. The Haryanka dynasty was a dynasty, was a kingdom empire, so to say. In eastern India, the capital was Patliputra. The capital was it Patliputra? Was it Rajgriha? Maybe it was a transition from Rajgrihi to Patliputra. I don't remember quite what it was. It was in eastern India. It was what was later Magad. So that's where the Haryanka dynasty was. The first king was most likely Bimbisar, and his son most likely was Shatru. So Shatru is said to have been a contemporary of Gautam Buddha and also Mahavir, most likely, according to the chronology that is accepted in the mainstream of history. Yeah. So Ajatshatru is known to have fought a war against the Vajjika Confederation, which obviously, as we know, was led by the Lichavi clan. Yeah, the Lichavis were a great ancient clan. Uh, the one of the Who was the first major king of the Gupta Empire? He he had married a Lichavi princess much later, much later. So let's not go into that right now. Yeah. So Ajatashatru fought a war against the Vajjika League, which was led by the Lichavi clan, and Ajatashatru is known to have conquered the republic, the Mahajanapada of Vaishali, and he used these catapults in this war, against the Vajjika Confederation. Yeah. So this happened sometime in the 5th century BC, like 480 BC or whatever Tejas is saying. I don't remember the date. Yeah. Um, so yeah, definitely catapults were used at the time. So what is okay? Yeah, the question some people may have is, what is a catapult? So let us take a look at a catapult. What is catapult? A catapult is this thing, Catapult. Catapult. It's this instrument that is used in siege warfare. Uh, there you go. There's a Roman guy holding a catapult. So it's this instrument on which you put these massive stones, and then you fling the stones at fortifications. So let's say you have a fortified city with a wall around it, and you want to bring the wall down. You have encircled the city with your soldiers and your army, but the wall is impregnable. Then what you do is you construct these massive machines, and you hurl these big boulders at the wall. It's like low tech artillery. Yeah. So that's what you had. This is what a catapult was, and typically, Wikipedia and whatever else will say that it was the Greeks or the Romans or whoever else that invented this thing. That's a good example of a catapult. This image here, yeah. So that's a catapult. And if you go to Wikipedia, I'm sure they will say it's either the Chinese or the Greeks or the Mesopotamians or whoever else that invented this. Now, think about it. Think about it logically. Think about it logically. Did ancient Indians have the technological ability to build something like a catapult? We know that during the so-called peak of the Saraswati Sindhu phase of our civilization, the so-called mature Harappan phase, you had a completely urbanized society in India, in northern and western and central India. Yeah. The cities were laid out according to a grid structure. You had multi-storied buildings everywhere. You had these massive granaries, massive meeting halls. You had these massive what do you call them, public baths. You had hydro engineering. You had dockyards. You had ships, and a ship is a complex machine, wooden instrument. Yeah. So a civilization that can develop all these advances in technology can certainly develop a catapult. And historians say that it's known that there is no evidence of warfare from the entire Saraswati Sindhu phase of Indian history. It's also known at the same time that we were sending soldiers outside of India to fight on behalf of our allies in Marhashi and Ilam against the Akkadians 4,300 years before today. Yeah. So at that time, we were in the most advanced phase of the so-called Saraswati Sindhu civilization phase. Yeah. Extremely advanced technology, the most advanced technology of its time. Were our engineers at that time capable of constructing catapults? I think they were capable of building much more complex instruments than catapults. But catapults are made of wood, and we don't have evidence of that. We don't have any evidence of that in carvings or paintings or whatever, inscriptions and all that. So, but also we have to understand that the absence of evidence, like I like to say, is not the evidence of absence. Yeah. So, so it is recorded that Ajatashatru used catapults. It's also known that we had extremely advanced technology 5,000 years before today. Yeah. So and at that time, our ancestors and our engineers from the time were certainly capable of building instruments such as catapults and much more sophisticated instruments. But we don't have evidence, so yeah, what can we say? So leave Wikipedia to do its thing. We don't have to focus on Wikipedia. Wikipedia is not a reliable or trustworthy source of information, and that's just where it is. Yeah. Okay, Rodrejit says Indians have been practicing various types of dance since ancient times. Did Indians export these dances to Southeast Asian countries and China? Are these dances still practiced in these countries even to this day? I'm not sure if we exported any dance forms to China, but we certainly did export a huge amount of uh, uh, such culture to the Southeast Asian region. Yeah. For instance, we have something called the Apsara dance. Let's see what the Apsara dance looks like. It is something that is still practiced. Yeah, the Apsara dance. Let's go to Google. It's in Cambodia, etc. Apsara dance. So Apsara dance is mostly in Cambodia. Let's take a look at this. This is from the walls of the uh, which dance? Angkor Wat temple. So you have these ladies dressed in these costumes who are apsaras, who represent the apsaras of our mythology. And you have these dancers who still wear the same costumes and perform the same dances. So these dances are clearly something that most likely came out of India. If you watch the actual videos of the dance, it's kind of reminiscent of Odissi dance and also to some extent of Manipuri classical dance. Yeah. So that's what you see. The moves are very graceful and they are reminiscent of Odissi dance and Manipuri dance in some ways. Then you have the Balinese dance, which is even more evocative of the Odissi dance form. And to some extent of Kuchipudi also, the facial expressions, the eye expressions and all that, it kind of reminds you of Odissi. But the Tribhanga posture that you see is reminiscent of Odissi dance. So this is the dance form that you have in Bali today. It's a Balinese traditional dance form, folk dance, classical dance. I'm not sure what you call it. The instruments are also very similar to Indian instruments. The percussion instrument, the drums and all that. Yeah. So it's clear that dance forms uh, were indeed exported out of India into Southeast Asia. Bali is in Indonesia. Cambodia is part of the other part of Southeast Asia, next to Vietnam and Laos and all that. So yes, and this is very fascinating actually. I wish our historians and sociologists would focus on these things and try to figure out at what stage in our history did all these cultural artifacts go out of India and enter into the society of these places. It's such fascinating history, and nobody has bothered to research any of this. Our historians are busy researching or inventing ways of denigrating our culture and our history. You have so much fascinating history over here that nobody is interested in. It's really a shame. So yeah, these dances are still practiced in these countries till this day. Obviously they have acquired the local flavor also. Yeah. So you can see some elements of Odissi in there. You can see some elements of Kuchipudi in there. You can see some elements of Manipuri dance in there. And obviously you have the local flavor, also the local folk flavor and all that. And they typically depict the Ramayana, mostly the Ramayana and various other ancient events and all that. So that's what it is. So yes, indeed, that's true. Once again, Rodrajit, Corsica is linguistically, culturally, and geographically much closer to Italy. Then why does France own Corsica? Is a good question, my friend. So let's take a look at the map. Where is a Corsica? Let's go to the map. Where is our dear good friend, the map? And where is Corsica? So let's go to the Mediterranean Sea. Yes. And over here we have Italy, as we know. And over here we have France. And here is what they call Corse. And south of course we have Sardinia. The main city in Sardinia is Cagliari, which is part of Italy. So Sardinia, this big island over here, is part of Italy, and this island here is Corsica. The French call it Corse, which is very close to Italy, and yet it's part of France. And therefore, the question naturally arises as to why is Corsica a part of France, even though it's linguistically, culturally, etc., geographically much closer to Italy. So, where is Genoa? Genoa is the city here. There you have it. So, Corsica, the island, was controlled, was owned, you could say, by the Republic of Genoa for about 400, 500 years until the 18th century. Yeah. So, Genoa was this city state, you could say, the Republic of Genoa. Italy was not always with this one nation. Yeah, they had the various phases of Italian history. So Genoa was a very powerful city, a very powerful republic at one time, and it essentially controlled or owned Corsica until the 18th century. And then there was this. Then what happened is that there was this Treaty of Versailles, not the 20th century Treaty of Versailles, but the 18th century Treaty of Versailles in 1768. So, according to this treaty, Corsica was given away, was ceded to France by the Republic of Genoa, as per this Treaty of Versailles in 1768. Now, why was it like this? So, Corsica. So essentially, what happened is that the French desired to own Corsica so as to have a bigger geopolitical or geostrategic or naval footprint in the Mediterranean Sea, and the Genoese were in need of money, and they had become weakened because of whatever reason. Yeah, things change. That's the main thing in history. So Genoa had become much weaker, and they were in need of money. The French offered them money. They said, "We'll not go to war. We'll just pay you money and give us Corsica." Yeah. So that's what happened. And the Genoese sold Corsica, just like the Russians sold Alaska to America. The same way the Genoese sold Corsica to France in 1768. Funnily enough, not funnily enough, but coincidentally, the year after the Genoese sold Corsica to France, they sold it in 1768. In 1769 was the birth of Napoleone di Buonaparte in Corsica. Yeah, he was born in Corsica. And his father was fighting a guerrilla war against the French. He was not willing to accept Corsica becoming a part of France. So he was fighting a freedom struggle, Napoleon's father, against the French in Corsica. Yeah. And eventually he kind of he was a practical man. Then he made his peace with France, and he even became, you could say, the ambassador of Corsica in the French court in Paris, etc. And through his connections, he was able to enlist Napoleon, his son, in a good military school. And then, as you say, the rest is history. Within 20 years, Napoleon was the emperor of France. That's how it went. In between, there was also the small issue of the French Revolution that happened. So that's how it was. So the Italians owned Corsica, the Genoese owned Corsica, and they chose to sell it to France. And that benefited France a great deal. And as a result of that, Corsica is still part of France. Interesting story. Shri Kesari says, Serbia has recently revoked visa on arrival, that facility for Indians. It was the only European nation to provide visa on arrival to India. Is this attempt of Serbia to join the Schengen region visa or failure of India's engagement with Serbia? Or is it a problem of illegal immigration? Okay. Yes, until the end of 2022, Indians could just fly to Serbia and they would be given a visa on arrival once they arrived at Belgrade airport or wherever it is that they arrived. Where is Serbia? Let's take a look at the map once again. Where's the map? So we know where Italy is. Yeah, this is Italy here. Italy. Yes. And if you go east of Italy, you have the Balkan region, you have Croatia, then you have Bosnia and Herzegovina, and then you have Serbia. And the Serbian capital is Belgrade. Yep. So what's happened is that Serbia wishes to join the European Union. It is currently in advanced stages of negotiation for joining the European Union. and the Schengen area. Yeah. And one of the preconditions for Serbia joining the EU is for Serbia to start adhering to EU visa regulations. So the European Union has a very uniform set of visa regulations. It's a visa-free zone. So once you have a visa to any Schengen country, you are free to travel in the entire region. That's how it is. So Serbia wants to become part of that, and that's why they have to now start adhering to whatever visa regulations the EU countries have. And for the EU countries, there is no visa on arrival for India, because India belongs to a category where they do not wish to offer visa on arrival. For Americans, there is visa on arrival anytime, but not for Indians. So until December 31, 2022, Serbia was offering Indians a visa on arrival. Now they are no longer doing that. It's not because of some kind of failure of India's government to engage with Serbia. It's because of Serbia's desire to join the European Union. And the European Union says that these are the rules. You want to join us, this is what you have to do. So that's what they are doing. All right. And they say it's about illegal immigration. It's not only about India, but other countries also, which were given the visa on arrival facility, which has now been revoked. Not only India, but some other nations as well. So the pretext is illegal immigration, blah, 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 all that. It doesn't matter. Who cares? Yeah. So that's how it is. So it's not because of some failure of Indian diplomacy or engagement. It's none of that. It's just because the Serbians want to join the European Union. That's why this has happened. Unfortunate, but that's how it goes in the world. C'est la vie. Yes. Okay, Shri Balram Putin says, what are the Lagrange points in space and what kind of telescope is Elon Musk building? Lagrange points. Let's put that on the screen because it's visually, it makes much more sense visually. There are 5 Lagrange points. These are equilibrium points. Let me put that on the screen so that you understand. Yeah. Visually, it's much more easier to understand. Okay. Lagrange points. So you have L1 to L5. Let's go to the images. Let's see a good image. This one is a good one. Yeah. So we have the Earth-Sun system over here. This here is the Earth. This bright point at the center is the Sun. And then you have L1, L2, L3, L4, and L5, the 5 Lagrange points. So the L1 Lagrange point is an equilibrium point between the Earth and the Sun. Yeah, we can calculate the distance. If you place an object over there, it will be in complete perfect equilibrium. It will not go anywhere else. It will stay in its place. If you place an object on at the L1 Lagrange point, it is between the Earth and the Sun. It's where the gravitational effects of both objects, the Earth and the Sun, cancel each other out. The L2 Lagrange point is in a straight line between the Earth and the Sun, but it is at a point where the Earth obscures the Sun's light. So it's on the other side. Yeah. And over there also you can place, you can park spacecraft in that place or in orbit around the L2 point. The James Webb Space Telescope is right now parked in an orbit around the L2 Lagrange point. So the L2 point is also a point of equilibrium between in the Earth-Sun system. The L3 point is on the other side of the Sun. So I would never recommend you do this, but if you were to hypothetically stare at the Sun, then on the other side of the Sun, you have the L3 Lagrange point. Yeah, that's also an equilibrium point where you can park some a spacecraft or a planet in orbit and you will never get to see it. Then you have the L4 and L5 Lagrange points. So the L4 and L5 Lagrange points are if you see the Earth and Sun system and the L4 point, then this forms an equilateral triangle, a triangle whose 3 angles are all 60 degrees. So that's the L4 and L5 Lagrange points. You can even park spacecraft or satellites or whatever in those points as well. So the Lagrange points are something you have with every object in the solar system, not only the Earth. Jupiter has its Lagrange points. And that's where you have these huge bunches of asteroids that are parked over there. The Trojan asteroids, yeah. Trojan asteroids. So Trojan asteroids. So if you see in this image, Jupiter has these 2 bunches of asteroids that go around with it, which are parked in the L4 and L5 Lagrange points of Jupiter, which are called the Trojan points, I believe. Yeah. So that's so in that way, Jupiter is able to shield Earth from the impacts of those asteroids, which would otherwise be free to go around and cause havoc in the solar system. Yeah. So that's the L4 and L5 Trojan asteroids of Jupiter. So that's what Lagrange points are. Now, the other question that Shri Balram Putin has asked is that what kind of telescope is Elon Musk building? So Elon Musk is not building a telescope. He is building various more and more powerful rockets. The most powerful rocket he's building right now is called the Starship, I believe. Yeah, the Starship, which is a massive giant rocket which has twice the amount of thrust that the Saturn V rocket had, the one that took the first human beings to the moon in the 1960s. That was until now, I believe, the most powerful rocket ever built. And the Starship that Elon Musk, the SpaceX, is building is twice as powerful. Yeah. So Elon Musk has said that you could use the Starship as a satellite, as a telescope of its own. The Starship. Let's take a look at the Starship. The SpaceX Starship, SpaceX, SpaceX Starship. Give me a second. Let me put that on the screen. So this is what the rocket looks like. The SpaceX Starship. As you can see, it's pretty much cylindrical in shape, more or less. So Elon Musk says that you could use this rocket, the cylindrical design, etc., as the structure that encases a telescope. So it could have like 10 times the resolution of the Hubble Space Telescope. So that's what he has proposed. And obviously, it's just a proposal. It's not like he's building it, but it's certainly feasible. You put this thing in Earth orbit and then you put these giant lenses in it and start using it as a telescope. It will work perfectly well. Yeah. So that's what he's proposing. So he's not right now building a telescope. This rocket has not been tested yet fully. I believe it's not yet gone into Earth orbit, but it's certainly going to happen sooner or later. And then, if the funding is made available, etc., you could have a giant telescope inside one of these rockets orbiting the Earth. So right now we have two major space-based telescopes. One is the old Hubble Space Telescope that went into orbit in the 1980s, late 80s, and then you have the newer telescope, the much more advanced James Webb Space Telescope, which is parked at the L2 Lagrange point. Yeah. And then you could have a new telescope if Elon Musk gets the funding. And he has also proposed that he could extend the life of the Hubble Space Telescope by. So right now, the Hubble Space Telescope, a few years ago, I think it was placed into an elevated orbit around the Earth at about 560 kilometers above the surface of the Earth. Yeah. And in the past few years, it's dropped. Its altitude has dropped, or elevation has dropped by about 20 or 30 kilometers. So eventually it's going to come closer to the Earth's atmosphere. It's going to start experiencing atmospheric drag, and eventually it will have to be brought into the atmosphere and burned out. That's what it eventually will happen. So it is possible that Elon Musk could use his SpaceX Dragon capsule spacecraft to go and survey the Hubble Space Telescope and again put it in a higher orbit, which could extend the lifetime of the Hubble telescope by another decade or two, possibly. Yeah, it's not a bad idea, and it's certainly something that's feasible if the US government is willing to put in the money. So that's what Elon Musk is doing, or could be doing. He could first of all extend the life span of the Hubble Space Telescope by another decade or so if he does this, if it is approved. And secondly, if the funding is made available, he could transform one of his Starship rockets into a giant telescope with maybe 10 times the resolution of the Hubble Space Telescope. So that is what is going on right now. Yes, right. Kush Kuhad says, do submarines go through the Suez Canal, considering the fact that they need to stay hidden, or do they go through the long route? So, what does the Suez Canal look like? Let's take a look at that. Suez Canal. Let's put that on the screen. Give me a second. Suez Canal. So this is what the Suez Canal looks like. So the Suez Canal is pretty wide. It can even take, as you can see, an aircraft carrier. An aircraft carrier can easily go through the Suez Canal. So if a ship of the size of an aircraft carrier can go through the Suez Canal, a submarine can certainly go through the canal as well. So the width of the Suez Canal is about 200 to 220 meters. And you can see that in this image that is on the screen right now. Yeah. Here's another image of an aircraft carrier transiting through the Suez Canal. So the width of the canal is more than 200 meters. The depth is about 23 to 24 meters. The depth of the Suez Canal. Now let's take a look at what a Los Angeles class submarine looks like. Los Angeles class submarine. One of them is called the USS Annapolis, right? So here is a schematic representation of a typical Los Angeles class submarine. So you have this black portion on top, the top half, and you have the red portion, the bottom half. Yeah. So the Los Angeles class submarine is the most prevalent class of American nuclear submarine. I think more than 20 of the submarines are still operational right now. Yeah. So the submarine has a beam, which is the width. I'm not sure what the beam is and what the width is. Let's go to Wikipedia and find out what the beam and the width is. The beam and the draft is. Los Angeles class submarine. 26 are active, 34 are retired. The length is 362 feet. That's 110 meters. That's the length. We don't care about that. The beam is 10 meters, which is how wide the submarine is. Yeah. And the draft is let's say it's 10 meters. That is the distance from the bottom of the submarine to the water line. Okay. So if you take this example, the red portion is the draft of the submarine, and that's about 10 meters. So that is if the submarine was visible in the water, half of it would be still submerged. That's the red portion, and that red portion is about 10 meters tall. And obviously the dark portion, the black portion, is also about 10 meters tall. But then you have the conning tower, which could be another 15 meters. So it's about 25 meters plus 10 meters. It's about 35 meters total in height that the submarine has. So clearly, with the depth of the Suez Canal being 23 meters, 24 meters, it's impossible for a submarine to pass through it submerged. Impossible. So a submarine can certainly pass through the Suez Canal, but it is impossible for a submarine of this size, or most likely any size, to stay submerged and to stay hidden. It will have to be visible. And that's the deal. That's how it is. So I think in the past, American submarines have transited through the Suez Canal. In the past, I'm sure Israeli submarines also must have transited the Suez Canal. And so the Suez Canal is not meant for, stealthy navigation. It's whatever happens there is essentially something that everybody gets to see. Yeah, that's how it is. Okay, Mohammed Adil says, how can I, as a student, study physics more effectively? And please suggest some effective steps to become a scientist. How can you study physics more effectively? First of all, it's all about mathematics. You want to be a good physicist, you have to have a very strong foundation in mathematics, in calculus, in linear algebra, in differential equations, and all that which comes with it. Take a good book, Mathematical Methods of Physics by Mary Bose, or whoever else it is. I've got a few over here. And the various subjects you need to master. So you need to have a very strong foundation in mathematics. That is non-negotiable. You want to be a good you want to be really adept at physics, you have to first of all master mathematics, and then to understand the various concepts of physics and to internalize them, you have to work through lots of problems. You have to solve lots of physics problems. Yeah. And you first understand the key concepts and principles of physics by reading textbooks, maybe by looking at diagrams and animations, maybe by watching by using online resources like videos and all that. Yeah. You understand the concepts from that, and then you apply that in solving problems. You have to solve hundreds, maybe thousands of problems to internalize all these concepts. It should be like part of you, living, breathing, sleeping physics. You also have to understand the experimental basis of physics. So how were all the experiments performed that gave us all this data and all of this information? Yeah, that will give you a deeper understanding of the subject. Then you try and relate the concepts that you have learned to real world situations. Take a look at a crystal. Why does a crystal look like this? A crystal has certain properties. Where do these properties come from? That's an example, and so on and so forth. So try and relate whatever you've learned, all this concept that you have mastered, to real world situations, because that will help you make the material more relatable and understand it better. And practice, 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 practice. Solve as many problems as you possibly can. That is the key to mastering physics. So that's how you study physics more effectively. Yeah, if you really want to study it properly and master the subject. Now, how do you become a scientist? So once you have studied and mastered the subject, you have all this knowledge and understanding, you can use it in two ways or three ways. One is you do nothing with it, that's a waste of time. The other way, so there are two real ways of using it. Most people who really master physics use it in two ways. One is they teach the subject to others, so they become teachers or professors. That's what you do when you have mastered the subject, but you want to communicate that and transmit that knowledge to others. The other thing you can do with your knowledge is to try and solve unsolved problems. That's when you become an actual scientist. A scientist is a person who solves problems, who tries to solve problems that are still unsolved. That's where you become a scientist. Just knowing physics doesn't make you a scientist or a physicist. Yeah, you have to actually work on problems, and problems that are still open problems. That's what you do. So first you have to really master the subject by going through the steps that I outlined, and then you have to pick up problems that are still open problems. There are lots of open problems in physics that nobody has an answer for right now. You take those problems and you try to solve them. That's called research, active research, and that's how you become a scientist. And obviously, if you want to be a scientist, you will need to have degrees and all that. Yeah, master's degree, PhD, whatever, and you will have to be in a scientific institution. You can also do it as an independent scientist, but it's much harder if you go through along that route. Yeah, because obviously, if you are in an institution, in an institute, you have the funding, you have the job security, and you have the time and all that. Otherwise, you don't. So that's how you do it, and that's how you become a scientist. I hope that kind of throws some light, clarifies it. Yeah, right. Rodriguez says, why are Central America and South America still poor, even though most of these countries are pro USA? Well, even the Philippines is pro USA. It is very poor. It's a third world nation. That's what the Americans call it. Pakistan has been pro USA for the longest period. They are desperately poor. There are so many African nations that have been pro USA for the longest time. They are desperately poor. So, this hopefully will tell you that being pro USA is not a ticket to becoming rich. Just because I am pro USA doesn't mean that I'll become rich. That's not how it works. Yeah. Which nations are rich, which are pro USA? Japan and South Korea and Taiwan. And why are these nations rich? Let's go to the map. Where is the map? The map is eluding me. I need to capture it and place it on the screen. Here it is. Yes. So the nations that are indeed rich are Taiwan, South Korea, and Japan. These three nations are under large scale permanent US occupation. There are tens of thousands of US troops in these places. And where you have so many Americans permanently stationed in these places, they want the place to be nice and clean and pretty and developed. So they have ensured that Japan and South Korea and Taiwan become highly developed. They don't have any permanent presence in the Philippines, so they don't care what happens there. They don't care what happens in the various African nations which are pro USA, and so on and so forth. That's how it goes. So just being pro USA is not a ticket to financial riches and freedom and all that. Yeah, get it? It's not as simple as that. Right. Shri Balram Putin says, I used to read a lot, but suddenly I quit. Because then I realized that I'm not able to apply the knowledge in my life. I'm really struggling. Please guide me. If you read a lot, it doesn't mean you're going to succeed in life. If you read all kinds of random stuff, you read a few novels here, you read some nonfiction there, read something else here, and so on and so forth, it's not going to help you in any way whatsoever in life. You will accumulate a lot of knowledge, information perhaps, but it's not going to help you in life. Reading doesn't change your life in any way whatsoever unless There's a caveat here. Unless it's focused reading and focused learning, and then you apply it. Yeah. So let's say you are a business, you are an entrepreneur. You want to start a business, and you have a budget of, let's say, 10 lakh for the year. Yeah. So then if you read specific books about how to bootstrap a small business and things like that, then you try things in life, in your business, then you may be able to apply it. So your application has to be specific and focused. Just there are people who read all their life and they do nothing in life. So if you want to do something in life, you have to take action. Reading is not action. Reading is passive. Yeah. So first of all, you need to be proactive in life. You need to have a goal. You need to be working towards the goal, and you have to be willing to fail. And your initial failures, 5, 6 failures, should be small failures, not huge failures, not catastrophic failures. Let's say you have a budget of 10 lakh rupees and you risk it all. You have to understand risk management. Yeah. Your first failure should not be your last failure, so bad that you can not ever try business again. Yeah. You have to fail in small increments, and you have to learn each time from the failure, and that's where reading comes in. So how to learn from failure, how to apply various principles in business. So that's just one example I'm offering you. When it comes to sport, if you want to achieve success in sport, you can read about mental management. There are people who are extremely talented, but they choke at the wrong minute, wrong time all the time in sport. Certain sports teams are notorious for choking. So how to manage the mental aspect of sport, that's what you can read. So you can only apply knowledge in life that you have read about when you're reading from a specific perspective. When you're reading specific knowledge, you read random stuff, you read a little bit of history, you read a little bit of science, you read some novels, you read something else, it's not going to help you. Your reading should be focused, and you have to apply those concepts and principles in whatever you're doing. Yeah. So that's how you do it. And so yeah, all the best. Trupti says, how do you raise your standards, and also how to increase confidence and self-esteem? Raising your standards means improving yourself every day or over a period of time. Yeah. Small, gradual, incremental changes. Improve whatever you're doing. That's essentially how you raise your standards. There are so many ways of doing it. Stop wasting your time. Stop watching Netflix. Stop scrolling through Instagram 7 hours a day. People do that. That's a very simple way of raising your standards. Stop doing that. Go on a diet. Social media diet. Only 30 minutes a day maximum, or whatever works for you. And then use the remaining time in something that is actually productive and that's going to take you somewhere. That's how you raise your standards. And then build good habits. Yeah. Build habits that take you in the right direction. Stop wasting time. Stop talking too much. There are so many. This habit among Indians. Indians argue so much. Indians, not just Indians, most people. It's not just Indians. That would be wrong to say. Most people talk too much. Most people argue too much. Most people never listen. Talk. So that's something. If that describes you, then you can try to change that. Yeah. So there's so much you can do to raise your standards. Yeah. Don't tolerate mediocrity. Don't tolerate the average. Try and rise above the average. Try and be better than everybody around you. That's how you raise your standards. So you just identify specific things in which you want to be better. Now, how do you increase confidence and self-esteem? It's not easy, but one of the easiest ways of doing it is to never make a promise you can't keep. And whatever you say you will do it. It's not always possible to succeed in that, yes, but you have to strive to do that. So never make a promise you are not capable of keeping. And secondly, whatever you say that you will do, go ahead and do it. And you keep doing this over and over again, your confidence and self-esteem will automatically rise. That's how you do it. That's like some simple tips. All right. Now let's briefly take some questions from the live chat, because I seem to have covered most of what I took today. But yeah. All right. So if you have any questions, you can ask me right now, and I will try and take a few questions from the live chat. Yes, I have a question since childhood, says Nilesh. Why does the universe exist, and what would be there or happen if the universe doesn't exist? Well, I have no answer to that. Only God would have an answer to that. If a God does exist, who has created the universe? Why does the universe exist? You ask 15 people, they will give you 15 different answers. There is no scientific way of answering it, because we don't know what's outside, if there is anything outside, and what created the universe and why was it created. We have no idea. No scientist, not even Albert Einstein or Isaac Newton or Ramanujan, can answer that question. It's purely hypothetical, purely, it's all conjecture. So we don't know. I definitely don't know. It's beyond my knowledge. My small amount of knowledge cannot answer this question. I have no idea why the universe exists and what would be there or happen if it would not exist. I am too small an entity to answer such a big question. But it's good you have this question. It shows that the thinking process is there, and it's a good thought to have. All right. Ice age coming, or it's just a myth? We will see. Anything could happen. This 4.2 kilo year event happened. Nobody knew it was coming, but it came. And there was this, what was it called? The Younger Dryas event, 1,000 years of ice age. It happened all of a sudden, most likely because of an impact event. So these things are what you would call black swan events. You have no idea they're coming, and they suddenly come. So yeah. So right now we are talking about global warming and all, but who knows? Something could happen, and it could cause an ice age. Is possible, yes. uh, why does time pass faster as we turn older? That's an interesting phenomenon. Yes, when you're a kid, when you're a small kid, like 3 years old, one day seems to take an eternity. One day is a very long event when you're a small toddler, 3-4 years old. But when you are 20, a day seems to pass faster. When you're 30, it seems to pass faster. And older people in the 70s and 80s say that the time is just flying away now. So yeah, it's a phenomenon that is definitely there. And it looks like the more experiences we accumulate, the more things seem to be the same. And when there is so much sameness, time seems to pass faster. But when you're experiencing something very different and very new, that's when time again seems to slow down. So it's a thing of perception, and maybe that's why time seems to pass faster. So the trick is, if you want time to pass slower, get yourself into experiences you've not experienced before, and things that are different, and then the time will seem to pass slower. What else do we have? Oh. Please explain Battle of 10 Kings. Already done, sir. Please look at my older videos. Do a little search. Search. I've already done it. The thing is this, I have got more than 1,000 video clips on this channel. I've answered almost every question imaginable. Obviously, I still get questions that I've never answered before, so that's great. So I'm really grateful for that. But there are lots of questions I've already answered. So you take the time to type a question and put it over here in the comments. You can take the same time to put it in the search box on my channel, and you may get a video clip in which I've already answered the question. So do try that. Yeah. Okay, let's take one more question before we are done. I can see a million. Am I an atheist? I think atheists are complete idiots. With all due respect, they are complete idiots. So, no, I'm not. With all due respect. Please don't get upset and emotional and all that. I'm just kidding. I am kidding here. Yes, with all due respect. I never spoke about Pangea. I must have spoken about Pangea. It was this hypercontinent, all the land masses stuck together. About when was it? 300 million years before today, or something like that. Yep. So there you have it. I have spoken about Pangea. And is there anything else that I could take now? I am woke. Yes, sir. Congratulations. You are woke. Congratulations. My thoughts on Erdogan's Turkey. Well, Erdogan's Turkey is going backwards. It's turned its back on the ideals and principles of Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, and it's going back into the Ottoman era. Maybe Shri Erdogan wants to recreate the Ottoman Empire. So yeah, that's what I can say in brief. It obviously is a nation that has imperialistic imperial ambitions, yeah, neo-imperial ambitions. It considers itself a nation, an empire that has been wronged, and they want to regain what they've lost. So it looks like the Turks are on that path. Yeah. Okay. All right. I guess we are at the end of today's session, 2 hours, 10 minutes plus. So thank you very much for all the questions. It's always great fun talking to you all. And let's keep doing this. All right. So I will see you in next week's live streams. And until then, take care of yourselves and see you soon. Thank you. Bye bye.